So today we'll be talking about Imperial Russian Army rations in the First World War. Let's take a look. Alright, so before we get into talking about these rations, let's talk about the silverware and accessories. This right here is an Imperial Russian spoon from World War I. They would have used them later, obviously. It wouldn't have just thrown away a perfectly good spoon, so the Red Army would have used this later on. Thankfully, this one's in pretty good condition, along with the knife to go with it. That one, I believe, is from the 1890s. It's just a pretty common style knife in Russia at the time. Below here, the fork, three-pronged fork, usually from a couple years before that. You kind of see these commonly with like Civil War reenactors. It's just the style of the fork of the period. It's not a Russian fork, it's just a period style fork. Below it is another similar style knife. It's definitely not from the period, it's reproduced today. I believe you can buy them at outdoor stores, and it folds into it. That little ring, if you turn it a little bit, you can fold it in, turn the ring back, locks it in place. Nice little knife. Style originates from the 1890s. It's a French trapper's knife, I believe. And then we have my pipe here. Now all of these items here would be stored into a small linen sack like this, and I would put that in my bread bag on my belt, or in my large rucksack or sapper's pack on my back. Alright, now onto the rations. Starting off this list would be 700 grams or 1.5 pounds of canned meat. Now, each of these cans is exactly 0.75 of a pound, so 3/4 of a pound, so 2 of those is your daily ration of meat. Next would be 2.2 kilograms of rye bread or 1.6 kilograms of biscuit. Now, over here I do not have rye bread, but I do have biscuit. Biscuit as in hardtack or similar to ship's biscuit. This is about half pound right here of ship's biscuit or hardtack. You'd be given a pound, 1.6 kilograms of that if you did not have bread. Now, next would be 240 grams of buckwheat, which in this canvas bag here, that is about 1,000, or I believe it's 800 grams to be exact, of buckwheat. And here's what buckwheat looks like. You can buy this in grocery stores today. In America, it's usually called kasha, Kasha. I believe it's a rye grain that has been ground. And it's really good in a porridge, usually mixed with butter and an egg. Next on this list would be 215 grams of fresh vegetables, or if they were dried vegetables, you would get 170 grams. Next would be 21 grams of butter or fat. Goose fat was popular in Germany with their army in the First World War. Here is a German butter dish. Let's see if I can open this. Here is the inside. Here's the lid. It's a little, I believe it's a rubber seal. Keep it sealed. Keeps it from melting too much. There's your little butter dish. You get, again, 21 grams of butter. Usually it would be fat in lieu of butter. I believe they call it tallow or sallow over in Russia, on that side of the world. Then you would get 17 grams of flour. It's like a pinch or two of flour. It's not a whole lot. It'd usually be mixed into a pot to make a stew or a porridge of some sort to help thicken it up. Next would be 2 grams of tea. Next to our buckwheat, we have some bags of tea. And to finish it off would be 25 grams of sugar for your daily ration in the Imperial Russian Army in the First World War. Now, if there was no bread nor biscuits to be had, they would have been given potatoes. The army went without alcohol. Surprisingly enough, you'd think it was cliche that they would be getting vodka every single day, but no. And at the time, vodka was called wine till the end of the First World War, or the Russian Civil War in 1917-1918. Now, the Navy did get wine, and it was usually mixed in their water to keep it from, to keep it pure. It was also to improve morale as well, but the army did go dry. No alcohol was allowed. The individual would not usually cook for himself, but the rations would be issued, to a field kitchen, and the field kitchen would cook it for, say, 10, 20, maybe 50 men, or even 100. Instead of every single individual soldier being on the front line or in their trench, cooking around a small fire, again, it would be cooked at a field kitchen. They'd usually make one great big pot of soup, or kasha, or porridge, or whatever. Now, Usually there were only 2 meals during the day, one in the morning and one in the evening. There wouldn't really be lunch at the time. The rations got less and less during the Russian Civil War, and they resorted to foraging more often than not, or even stealing from other villages, which made them quite unpopular. Both sides, reds, whites, blacks, greens, and other peasant armies would resort to foraging and stealing, made them unpopular all the way around, because again, everybody was starving. Yeah. Now, the vegetables at the time that would be issued would usually be peas, cabbage, or onions, sometimes garlic, and the dishes usually prepared by the field kitchens would be popular that were cabbage soup or other soups, porridges, buckwheat, and that's really about it. Not a whole lot else. So if you like all that, you might enjoy being in the Imperial Russian Army in the First World War. Now, for procurement of foraging, which is usually hunting game in the countryside, you would be given a fowling shotgun, which is usually a single barrel, sometimes percussion or flintlock, or, if you're very fancy and modern, smokeless powder shotgun. There's a funny story of Baron von Eugen Sternberg at the outbreak of the Russo-Japanese War. It was written by Piotr Wrangel in his memoirs that when the war broke out, Baron von Eugen Sternberg was leader of the Mongol cavalry at the time. He was in Moscow. He rode alone with a fowling shotgun to the capital of Mongolia. They say it took him about a year. And they say he brought no extra clothes or equipment besides said fowling shotgun and the equipment to load it. So that man went all the way across Russia, all the way across Mongolia, with a fowling shotgun, a black powder single barrel shotgun. They said he was not needed in Mongolia and was sent back to join the, I believe it was the artillery in the Russo-Japanese War. So he went back, and it took him about another year. So this man spent 2 years on horseback with no spare clothes with a fowling shotgun, surviving through the Russian steppe and the Mongolian tundra and steppe as well. But yeah, that's just one interesting story. His pistol, Baron von Eugen Sternberg, is in Mongolia in a museum, and it has some ivory grips and some ivory engravings on it somewhere. It's a very fancy pistol. I'll have to put a picture up at some point. Now, we talked about Imperial Russian Army rations. We're going to talk about the Imperial Russian Navy rations. Usually, it would be a shot of this and a shot of this, especially if you're in 1917 and the Navy revolts and you're an officer. Getting shot with one of these and one of these really ruins your weekend plans. Anyway, long live the Tsar.